Hello my friends, welcome back to the channel. So happy to have you here. It's time for another book list. I know how much I love book lists and I hope you love book lists too. Today is one that I'm pretty excited about. This is going to be my top 10 books by people of color. Now, just before we get underway here, a few of the ground rules that we go over for every list. I am not going to be listing any books that I have featured on previous lists. So whether it be my top audiobook, my favorite books of all time, my favorite books by women, there will be no repeats because I don't want to become the Cinefix channel where they make some great movie content, but they keep using like the same 6 movies for everything. Like everything can't be Tarkovsky's The Mirror, just like for me, everything can't be A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. So you will not see A Tale for the Time Being, you won't see Crying in H Mart. Just know that I love those books dearly, they're in their own lists, and yeah, let's get it underway. So for number 10, we are going to start off with some poetry, which I know is not typically what people come to for me. Normally it's like the weird books and the classic books, but I do love me a spot of the poetry from time to time. And the number 10 spot is going to Saul Williams and his poem, She. Now, Saul Williams appeared on my favorite books of all time list with his other poem, Said the Shotgun to the Head. She, I don't think is quite as good as that one. Just know that Said the Shotgun to the Head would have been on this list too. But She is a wonderful examination of the sort of interactions between male and female. And it really holds up in a romantic sense the idea of the divine feminine. And like how every woman is a goddess in some way or another. And starts to deconstruct little bits of masculinity, especially in hip-hop culture. That's something that Saul is very focused on, or was very focused on around the time that he wrote this poem and Said the Shotgun to the Head, as well as a couple albums he had out at the time. But yeah, it's just some beautiful poetry, all about women, all about loving women, about sex, about love, and his turn of phrase and his ability to build images, both literally with the text, but also with the text in the way of like mental images, is actually like astounding. So, number 10, She by Saul Williams. Alright, next is number 8, and that is going to be The Boxman by Kobo Abe. Now, this book I featured on Weird Books over on TikTok, and it's somewhat of an impenetrable novel. And I love it. So this book is ostensibly about a man who takes it upon himself to become a boxman, which is a phenomena of people who just get the notion, the inescapable urge to put a giant box over their head, leave their homes, and just live out on the street walking around with the box on their head and living this peculiar sort of life. Now, if you're familiar at all with the rest of Abe's work, such as The Woman in the Dunes, you know everything this man touches is pretty weird. And The Boxman is no exception. Like, there are so many twists and turns that I'm not sure we know what is real and what is not. And so many different cases of like false identity, assumed identity, like it all features pretty heavily into identity and the concept of identity, but also on obsession and violence around like marginalized individuals. Like, it's so wild. I still have a hard time sort of wrapping my head around it. If you want to get into Kobo Abe, I feel that The Woman in the Dunes is more accessible, but I feel that The Boxman is better. If you can brook not knowing what's going on at any given moment. But at the end though, like the final like image of the novel just is so unsettling, and I love it. So yeah, number 8, The Boxman by Kobo Abe. Alright, number 7 is going to be Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Now, James Baldwin, thankfully, in recent times, mainly since the ascent of the Black Lives Matter movement, has finally been coming back into the public consciousness in a way that he deserves, because he was very popular and very influential at the time that he was writing and the time that he was alive. In the intervening period, though, I feel his influence has waned pretty hard, and now he's coming back in a big way. In particular, his essays, such as like The Fire Next Time, Notes from a Native Son, like a lot of those types of writings are entering very much into the public consciousness and the public discussion around violence towards Black lives. But I'm going to go the other direction with it and choose a work of his fiction, because this man did it all. He wrote amazing nonfiction, amazing essays, amazing novels, and amazing plays. His play Blues for Mr. Charlie is incredible, and the Amen Corner is mwah, I love it. But back to Giovanni's Room. Giovanni's Room is a touchstone of queer literature. It is a very short novella, but it packs quite the punch of an American expat living in Paris and falling in love with a man named Giovanni, and their star-crossed love. Like, I don't want to give too much of it away because, like, the novel packs a lot of punches, but James Baldwin just knows how to weave an entire feeling out of nothing. Like, this man has such control over the English language and such control over the emotional language of his readers. I struggle to think of another author who does it as well as him. And Giovanni's Room is a great in if you are trying to get into his work. But if you're more of the non-fiction persuasion, The Fire Next Time is a harrowing read. All right, next up is going to be Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabrielle Garcia Marquez. I know some people will be surprised that I have chosen Love in the Time of Cholera over The 100 Years of Solitude, which I'm not even going to argue the fact that is his most iconic and most impactful novel. I just read Love in the Time of Cholera first, and so that one sort of burrowed its way into my heart. And frankly, like, it is a little bit more accessible, which I think spoke to me at the time, because if I had tried to start with Garcia Marquez with The 100 Years of Solitude, I'm not sure I would have finished it. But because I knew how good he was from Love in the Time of Cholera, I was like, yes, I can stick this out over the literal century of the novel and the just numerous generations and all the goddamn names that it is like impossible to keep track of. But Love in the Time of Cholera is a much more simple story in its execution, but it is also still super complex in the way that you can think about it. Many people characterize Love in the Time of Cholera as a romantic story, and I disagree. I think that it is quite the opposite. I think that it is a wonderful example of an unreliable narrator and toxic masculinity. Because the main character of the novel, let me back up. The novel starts at the funeral for this woman's husband, and while she's like going about like the funeral duties, this guy from her past comes up to her and he's like, "Hey, I have always loved you." And then we get the story of the first time that they met and fell in love, all the way up to now. But in that amount of time, this dude has had sex with so many women. He has just used these women, and it's presented to you in a way where you're like, oh man, like, but he always loved her. No, he didn't. Clearly he didn't. It's just so transparently about power and control, at least to me. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez also said that you have to be careful not to fall into his trap about siding with this young man who becomes this old man. And there's some real stalker behavior things that happen. There's this one point where like they're not going to see each other for a while. And so he like plays his violin outside her window while she's asleep, and she's like laying in bed like this, like, right? And the first time you read it, you're like, oh, that's so romantic. And then the more you think about it, you're like, that is stalker behavior. That is not okay. So you read it for yourself, make up your own mind about it, because I've gotten in arguments with people about this book. Yeah, people don't like it when you say it's not that romantic. Ugh. All right, for this next entry, I'm kind of cheating a bit because it'll take up 2 spaces. How about that? It'll take up 2 spaces, and that'll make up for how I'm cheating, because it's actually 10 works. And this is going to be The Century Cycle by August Wilson. Now, August Wilson is one of the most important and most influential American playwrights of all time. Whether you know it or not, have probably experienced or are at least aware of one of his plays, because so many of them have been made into movies. There's Fences, which was recently made into a movie starring Denzel Washington. There's Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, which is famously the last movie that Chadwick Boseman made before he died. And The Century Cycle is unparalleled in American theater. So it's, like I said, it's 10 plays, and they all take place in a different decade of the 20th century. Some people call it the Pittsburgh Cycle because it also takes place in Pittsburgh. I think Century Cycle sounds cooler. And man, there are some like absolute slaps in these. There's only like 1 or 2 that I don't particularly care for, like 7 guitars it's fine. Yeah, some of my favorites are like Gem of the Ocean is this wonderful sort of like portrait of African American culture rebuilding itself after the Civil War, because it's in the 1900s, which isn't too far after the end of the Civil War, and sort of the mythology that builds up around this place, this city of Pittsburgh. There's The Piano Lesson, which is just so wonderful. The piano Lesson and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom just show how integral African Americans are to American culture, and how they just don't get any sort of credit for it. And man, oh man, like the characters, the connection to music, it's all so breathtaking in those. Fences is a beautiful, beautiful play about generational struggles, like the struggles between fathers and sons, and what do you owe your next generation? What does the next generation owe you, if anything? And man, it's that play does not pull any punches. It is brutal at times. And then of course there was like the periods in the 60s and 70s during the civil rights movement, and the plays very much reflected that, which is incredible. And then the final one, Radio Golf, where it's in the 90s, and you show just how much is being sacrificed by African Americans who are trying to assimilate into white culture but still aren't accepted by that culture, for which they are sacrificing their own culture. I just said culture a lot, but he's so important to the culture, and he doesn't get the mainstream recognition that he deserves. All right, for this next spot, I'm sure people have been wondering, where's he gonna be in this list? Because he's definitely gonna be in it for how much I talk about him. This spot is going to Haruki Murakami and colorist Sakura Tazaki and his Years of Pilgrimage. Now, Sakura Tazaki and his Years of Pilgrimage, and I'm only gonna say the whole thing that time. I'm done saying the whole thing because it's such a long title. It's one of the... Look, when you're dealing with Murakami, you're not sure which Murakami you're gonna get, right? You're not sure, am I getting this is really weird Murakami and I don't know exactly why it's so weird? This is really sad Murakami and I can't quite put my finger on why it's so sad? Or, hey, he's talking about running music and generally just being unable to write for women. This novel is the sad type. So in broad strokes, the plot is that this man, Sakura Tazaki, when he was younger, all of his friends kind of abandoned him, cut him out of their lives, and he never knew why, like what was the reason behind it. And later in his life, he discovers it's that because one of his friends accused him of sexually assaulting her, but never to him, only to the rest of the friends, he didn't do it, is what we are given to understand. Some people have put forth the idea that he did actually do it, and he's a unreliable narrator. I'm not sure that there's much evidence to support that. The genuine hurt and genuine surprise that Sakura shows would lead me to believe that he did not do it, and that there's just Murakami absurdity happening, but in the heartbreaking way and not in the like, oh, there's a talking cat way. And this novel, of course, like ties very directly into Murakami's love of music. The Years of Pilgrimage of the title is a reference to a piece of music that comes up again and again and again in the narrative. And yeah, man, just watching this man sort of like meander through his life, not really knowing what he wants or how he can get it, or what was taken from him, or how or if he can get it back, is like one of the most quietly sad novels that I've ever read. I once compared it on TikTok to Lost in Translation, not due to its content, but due to the feeling that you leave the novel with. So yeah, highly recommend it. And he kind of, the woman in it isn't great, but she's far from his worst. So, you know, do with that what you will. Alright, in my opinion, you cannot have a book list on people of color without having Octavia Butler in there somewhere. She is a force of nature, one of the best to ever do it, and this is one of my favorite novels of hers. This is Wild Seed, which is the first book in the Patternist series. Now, Wild Seed was the last novel in the series completed, but it chronologically happens first in the story. And that story is fascinating. So with her typical eye and ear for inclusivity and just really deep and rich world building, Octavia Butler presents us with these two sort of immortal, powerful creatures that appear to be human. The first is Doro, who is essentially a psychic vampire. He cannot die. His soul, his spirit cannot die, but whenever his body dies, his spirit transfers into another body, takes it over, kills that person, and he inhabits them for a while until that body begins to break down, and then he has to do it again. It's this constant cycle of just jumping to person to person to person. And as a result, he becomes very detached, he becomes very callous and cold, and he sets about breeding a super race of mutant people, because that's what you do when you have no empathy and you live forever. And the other character is a woman named Anyanwu, who is incredible because she has the ability to shapeshift her body into basically anything, develop any sorts of enzyme or chemical within her body, and she too is functionally immortal. Now, when Doro discovers her, he is obviously over the moon because this is some wonderful breeding stock, a wild seed that he had no idea that he would be able to find. And I'm not going to give much more away from there, but it kicks off a like centuries long story that by the end of the Patternist series reaches far into the future, because man, she starts with the fantasy, ends us with the sci-fi. She's just so good. And the thing that she can do that I think a lot of other sci-fi and fantasy authors fail at is she, while building a world that you believe in and you understand the rules of, she also creates real characters. Characters that aren't just one thing. They all speak with different voices. You understand the choices that they're making, and it all sort of like coalesces. If Octavia Butler, for whatever reason, didn't write quote-unquote genre fiction, she would be remembered as one of the greatest authors of all time. If she wrote just straight up literary fiction, she would be the person that like snotty literature professors were talking about all the time as having this influence and that influence, because she's so goddamn good, right? And we kind of see this too with Shirley Jackson, where they have such strong ideas, such philosophical ideas, but such wonderful imaginations that they kind of have to write genre fiction, right? Literary just can't do it for them. They can't be contained by the structures of just a sitting room period drama. And that, unfortunately, carries with it the prejudice that genre fiction is faced with often. In particular, like right now, we see it a lot with like YA fiction or erotic fiction, where people will be saying like, grow up and read Crime and Punishment, or just why you have to read spicy books. Oh, I don't know why that sounded like Bob Dylan. But yeah, definitely a casualty of that she is not known as one of the greatest authors of all time, because she absolutely is. I've ranted enough, on to number one. And the number one spot goes to one of the most depressing novels I've ever read in my life. This is Shipwrecks by Akira Yoshimura. Holy shit. This novel is so sad. It's just so sad. So in broad strokes, the novel tells the story of a small fishing village on the coast of Japan that they subsist themselves, because they're horribly, horribly poor. They subsist themselves by luring ships to become shipwrecks, on like this rocky outcropping near their village. And then they kill everyone on board of those ships and take everything that's on there to either sell or live off themselves. Now, that already is kind of depressing. But when a ship full of dead bodies that was sent out to sea because they had plague shows up, things just spiral out of control. I don't know what it is about the Japanese novels that I like to read, but god damn it, every single one of them, almost to the last page, to every single one of them, it's just so depressing. Like even Murakami, depressing, weird and depressing. Yoshimura, depressing. Silence by Shikazu Endo, depressing. Like, what is going on over there, guys? Why is everything so sad? You guys have such a beautiful country. But this novel is so quietly understated. Like, it doesn't get needlessly graphic, I would say, but it gets just graphic enough so that it really hurts you. And you can see a lot of the oh no moments coming, but that doesn't diminish the impact of them. In fact, I think it makes it hurt a little worse. Yeah, and then that final ending, that final page is just such a gut punch. It's so bleak, but it's so beautiful, and it's so well written. And if you can stomach a novel that is amazingly sad, definitely read Shipwrecks, because wowsy, wowsy, wowsy. And that's going to do it. That's going to do it for our list. I kind of cheated a little there. It's kind of only like 9, or if you want to be like really pedantic about it, it's like 19 books that I think you should read that are my favorite by people of color. So first and foremost, what are your favorite books by people of color? Throw it down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Give me some recommendations. I would really appreciate it. Yeah, and thank you so much for watching. Follow me on the other socials. I'll have a link in the description of this, but on TikTok, it's Gen Insight. On Instagram, it's Gen_Insight. If you're still watching this, hey, and you haven't subscribed, hey, subscribe. That'd be super cool. And thank you so much for watching. I'm going to try to get a review out for Monday, but work has really been taking up all my time. So we'll see if we can get it done. But hey, in the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. And I'll catch you next time. Love ya.